Welcome to Life Cycle Talks, a series of talks presenting the research front to keep you up to date with the science and application of the life cycle perspective. Today's Life Cycle Talk will focus on how life cycle thinking and LCA is applied by the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency and how is it integrated into EU policy. My name is Anna Wikström, and I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Björn Spak, advisor from the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. A warm welcome to you, Björn. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few practical details. All Life Cycle Talks will be published and made available on the Swedish Life Cycle Center's YouTube channel. And please note that the raise hand function will not be used for Life Cycle Talks. However, you're welcome to submit your questions in the Q&A function, and we will select some of them for the Q&A session after Björn's presentation. And back to you, Björn. I'm curious, what is your background within LCA and life cycle thinking?
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for having me. So I started out working with life cycle assessment in 1998 at what is now known as Essity. I was working with LCAs of absorbent hygiene products, and at the time we were kind of transitioning from using an in-house made LCA, Excel-based LCA tool to using a professional LCA software. Over the years, I spent a lot of time building up databases with data from our own suppliers and from our own production, as well as generic data. And we gradually moved from making LCAs simply for products to including entire assortments. Also, the purposes of the products or the LCAs changed a bit, going from being simply for our product development to include our suppliers in the dialogue with them, and eventually communicating with other stakeholders. After leaving Essity, I went to RISE, working with LCAs of textiles, and now since about 4 years back, I'm with the EPA, working with the integration of LCA into policy.
Great, thank you so much. And now it's time for your life cycle talk.
Thank you. So, as previously stated, I'm with the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, which is a committed coordinating force for Sweden's environmental efforts. At the EPA, the one thing that kind of frames our work the most is the Swedish National Environmental Objectives that you can see to the left in this picture. So these are a common platform for Sweden's environmental efforts, and it's a system comprising 16 objectives. It was decided by the Swedish Parliament already in 1999, and then later complemented by an overarching generation goal. And these environmental objectives provide a structure for Sweden's environmental efforts at the national level, at the EU level, and internationally. Of course, at the EPA, we also work with the environmental parts of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But how then are we using life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment at the EPA? Well, I would say regarding life cycle thinking that we are really applying life cycle thinking in our daily work. We do that by considering this vast array of environmental impacts. We consider not only climate then, but acidification, eutrophication, littering, impact on biodiversity, etc. And we also consider the entire value chain. So we are active working with resource extraction, with processing, production of different products, packaging, transports, and a lot with waste handling. However, we often do not assume the common position that you have within life cycle assessment and life cycle thinking, that you focus on a product or a service. But a lot of our efforts is working with, for example, emissions on a national level or biodiversity at the landscape level. And also, for most of the things we do, we don't really use the nomenclature that you frequently find in life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment. So I would say that we are walking the walk, but we're not really preaching it. Regarding life cycle assessment specifically, I would say that the main way that we are using them is in communication. So when we are communicating with individuals, for example, in the role of consumers, or organizations like producers, We use the background knowledge gained from LCAs in the guidance that we provide to make sure that we take care of the entire value chain and consider all kinds of environmental impacts. We also publish some emission factors, for example, in the climate leap that I will address in the next slide a bit. Besides these, we are very active also in the development of the EU environmental footprints, the PEF and OEF, which I also will come back to later on. We do not only work with life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment policy in just at the EPA, but also other government agencies are involved in integrating it. So, for example, we have the climate calculation system of the Swedish Transport Administration, which is a mandatory climate calculations of infrastructure projects with a budget over 50 million SEK. That's about 4.4 million euros. So this is a praxis that was established already in 2015, and where there is a generic database, but you can also supply your own specific data. As I said, we're working at the EPA with the Climate Leap, which is a Swedish investment support, which makes it possible to invest in fossil-free technology for the future and green transition applicable to companies, municipalities, regions, and organizations throughout Sweden. And this is actually funded in part by the EU Recovery Fund. As of January 1st, 2022, the climate impact of buildings being erected in Sweden needs to be declared. So in addition to these climate declarations, there will also eventually be limit values for new buildings, at latest in January 1st, 2027, but possibly earlier. If we widen our scope a bit to include the entire European Union, this is a picture that has been made by the European Commission. And it's a way to illustrate how these terms, life cycle thinking, life cycle assessment, life cycle costing, and PEF OEF have been integrated into EU policy since already the early 90s. So as you can see, they occur early on, but at a quite low level. But following especially the EU Green Deal by the previous von der Leyen Commission, there is a sharp increase in the number of citations of these methods in the policies being developed and implemented. This is another picture by the European Commission highlighting the policy uses of LCA and environmental footprint methods. So a caveat here, you see it says carbon footprint, it says environmental footprint. I think usually when it says environmental footprint at a EU Commission slide, they will mean specifically the PEF and the OEF. But I think in this particular case, it is more LCA results that is meant by that term. Going into these policies a bit, at the carbon footprint side, we have the battery regulation, which mandates the declaration of carbon footprint. Later on, they will include limit values or threshold values also, and also performance levels for different kinds of batteries, or the climate performance of different batteries within the same category. There is a similar approach regarding photovoltaics under the current Eco-Design Directive, where there is being developed a demand to declare the carbon footprint for these types of products. As regards the Net Zero Industry Act and the end-of-life vehicles, the Commission are then highlighting that they want to include carbon footprint somehow. As of yet, I have not received any details on that, so I'm very curious and to follow up on that, what will happen. There are a few pieces of legislation or policy that could adhere either to carbon footprint or environmental footprint, and two of them are in the bottom, the taxonomy and the CSRD. So this is more within the realm of finance, which these are policies that really make reference to the PEF. And to carbon footprints based on PEF, but they don't mandate the use of them, but allows also other methods. The ESPR, the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation, which was adopted earlier this year, will have delegated acts developed under it. And here the Commission has the possibility, when they find that the climate impact or the environmental footprint is the main concern with that kind of product, they have the possibility to include demands on that based on the environmental footprint method. As regards construction products, now, as you see, there's a bit of overlap with the ESPR because there are some of them, like ventilation products, for example, that are already being regulated under the current Eco-Design Directive. But the construction products, this is the case where I think environmental footprints might meet something else also, because they are not then regulated using PEF, but rather the EN 15804 EPD standard. The Critical Raw Materials Act is supposed to develop also for criticality PEF-based approach. Regarding green claims, a directive which hopefully will enter trilogue in early next year. There is also the possibility to use or mandate even the PEF, but since that has not been progressed further than that, it's difficult to say where it will land. Safe and sustainable by design concerning chemicals is also an area, a policy where PEF can be used, as is the consumption footprints that are made by the European Commission as a way to highlight the impact of consumption in member states as well as the entire European Union. Going a bit into the legislation here and the legislative process. So this is a short overview of the legislative process, which I think can be good to bear in mind when you think what is happening with this development of policy. So here you see the number one, the European Commission. So they have the sole possibility here within these institutions to propose new legislation. And when they propose that, they will send it on one hand to the European Parliament and on the other hand to the European Council. And these two entities will amongst themselves decide on and negotiate a position that is common to that body. And later on, they will enter a trilogue where they, together then with the Commission, will come to an agreement on what the new legislation will be like so it can be adopted. And the EPA then has a role in the development of the environmental footprint, as I indicated earlier. So we are, of course, a government agency. So the Swedish government offices, they are requiring the EPA to take part in the European Commission expert groups on the environmental footprints. So these are two groups. It's the Environmental Footprint Steering Group and the Technical Advisory Board. The Technical Advisory Board also has two working groups, the Agricultural Working Group and the Data Working Group. And the EPA is acting then as a representative of Sweden in the EF Steering Group and the Technical Advisory Board, currently not in any of the working groups. So. And the purpose of these expert groups is to give advice then to the Commission when they further develop these methods. And that is why the government agency feels it's important to partake in this and be a part of how these methods are being developed. However, there are a few of us working with this, basically and I do not have all that competence, neither on the different modelings choices that you can make or on all the value chains that can be affected. So luckily for me, the EPA is a part of the Swedish Life Cycle Center. And as requested by the EPA, the Swedish Life Cycle Center has a PEF expert group where we can discuss these different proposals and these methods and the different value chains. And there is also a Technical Advisory Board coordination group because there are other Swedish Life Cycle Center members that also take part of the Technical Advisory Board, but representing other entities than Sweden. And this has been instrumental in the way that we work and can provide good advice to the Commission. Besides that, we also have the Nordic Product Policy Group. So this is under the Nordic Council of Ministers, where we in a similar way can discuss these topics and give input to the Commission as they further develop these methods. Besides the development of the methods, the EPA also has a role, of course, regarding the implementation of these footprints into the legislation. Here we are, of course, similarly governed then by the government offices. And here we have a bit different demands than when we are developing the methods. So one of our main tasks is to provide the government offices with advice when a new legislative proposal is being discussed within the council. So basically, we can advise them on how to proceed, help them to understand the methods and how to apply them in the best way. Similarly, we are also required by the government offices to partake in other EC expert groups, other expert groups of the Commission that are more involved in the development of the policy rather than the method. So, for example, we are contributing to the battery regulation expert group, where we can give advice on how to best implement the PEF method when having the carbon footprints for the battery regulation. So that was all for me. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Björn, for a great presentation. Now I have a few questions for you. I will start with my own and then select from the Q&A.
Okay.
Yes, let's see here. A lot of efforts has been put in the development for EPDs for a multitude of products, especially within buildings, referring to example EN 15804. How come so much resources has been put in developing PEF when PEF and EPDs are so similar?
Well, that's a very good and valid question here, and I think the Commission, they have put in efforts on both sides. One obvious thing, of course, is that regarding the EPDs, although the standard is common to all the program operators, there are about 50 program operators, and there are differences within their general program instructions and their PCRs, and that makes it difficult perhaps to have legislation based on it. So I think that is one of the reasons why they wanted to develop the PEF further, to have more common rules for all.
Okay, great, thank you. To dig further into the topic of EN 15804, while the battery regulation and the proposed Green Claims Directive both refers to PEF, the revised construction product regulation and the energy performance of building directive both make reference to EN 15804. Do you think the Commission will continue to promote EPDs and PEF in parallel?
Well, I mean, if you look back, of course, there has already been a lot of harmonization, and that is the way the current EN 15804 has really been influenced. And I think there is still a lot of effort. We are discussing this in the Technical Advisory Board, and I really feel that there is a push from the Commission to promote this harmonization, because they also feel that this is can be quite troublesome, of course, when you have separate or differing ways to calculate for different legislations. So I really hope so. It will probably take some time, but I think it's going on, and I for sure support that.
Okay, great. We continue here. On one hand, there is a lot of talk about life cycle thinking, and LCA is integrated in policy. On the other hand, it seems like a lot of policy, like national climate declaration of buildings and the battery regulation, focus only on climate. Why do you think this is?
Well, I think there are different reasons for this. On one hand, of course, you can see that we have had climate regulation for quite a long while, and in a way, it's a way for the climate regulation to include the entire value chain. So not just focusing on the emission from a certain factory, for example. On the other hand, I think there has been a lot more political demand for climate action than for other types of environmental impact. And you might also think that with, for example, the battery regulation, it's a way to test to include the entire value chain, but for one indicator. And I for sure hope that we will see more types of environmental impacts included in future regulations.
Great, thank you. And as a government agency, which roles do you see for an attributional and consequential approach, respectively, in life cycle-based policy?
Well, I would say that if you want to develop a policy, or before you develop a policy, and when you try to find out what is the best way to set up the electricity supply for a certain region or something, there you should for sure try to get more of a consequential approach. But then on the other hand, when you want to follow up something like the battery regulation, when you want to set a limit value for something, then an attributional approach is more prudent, I would say, as a general remark.
Okay, great, thank you. We will also have some questions from the Q&A. Has PEF as method been considered for any public policy specific for Sweden?
Not that I have heard of, actually. No, it's for some member states you can see that a lot more, but as of yet I don't think it has. I will have a special presentation on PEF with the government offices next week already, so maybe they will take that back to the politicians and describe the benefits.
Great. And how do you see the standing between EPD and PEF? Will PEF be most relevant for all other products than construction products?
Difficult to say. I mean, for any products, of course, where it really is part of the legislation, there you will have a strong role for PEF. Regarding other, for example, food and feed, and yeah, especially food. There has been a lot of pilot phase PFCRs developed for food, but food is excluded from the eco-design regulation. So there it will depend on how much it is adopted in the Green Claims Directive, I think. And since that has not yet entered trilogue, it's a bit too early to say. But I suppose that, yes, the EPDs will probably prevail for construction for quite a while.
Okay, let's continue here. With the diverging versions and different implementations of environmental footprint in different legislations, should we still refer to PEF as a single method?
That's a good question. Well, I think, I mean, you should also understand that, of course, the PEF, the recommendation to use the environmental footprints, that is not a legislative text, so it's not a legislation in as such. But if you want to use it, you have to refer to it to include it in a delegated act or something. So I think probably you could see the PEF as one method, and then it is applied in a bit different ways in different legislation. But it will be really interesting to see how much they will diverge depending on which legislation it is and how they will be interpreted.
Okay, thank you. Should we, as LCA practitioners, also promote PEF and recommend it to our clients? Often we will work only with ISO 14040 and 44 as PEF is not mandated. Should we be more proactive here?
I think for sure certain clients, depending on what kind of products they have, they will be affected by it earlier than others. So if you look, for example, to the ESPR, and the product categories that are highlighted there. If you're in any of those, yes, I suppose that you should really look into PEF and understand it. But if you are if you really are a beginner, it's complex to understand it, and maybe it's not the easiest thing to understand at first, but you have to take it in gradually.
Okay, thank you so much. We will continue. How do regulations look like for new technology specifically in the battery industry? Is there any incentive regarding regulations for using non-critical materials?
Now that's a good question. I must confess that my main concern with the battery regulation has been with the carbon footprint. So I have other colleagues who are a lot more skilled in that. I mean, there is a demand to use recycled material, but that is not really the question for that is not really answering that question, because this would be to avoid having those kind of materials at all, I think, in this case. So I'm not quite sure exactly how that is expressed in the battery regulation, but if you send me an email, I can probably forward it to some colleague.
Great. Next question. For the digital product passport, will it be okay to use LCA as a source of information?
The digital product passports under the ESPR is something that a lot of people have a lot of expectations for. How they will look will depend on the product group, and it will be defined in the delegated act for that respective product group. To be honest, I don't think that this will be a big part for most products. I don't know. But I think there will be a lot of other information that will be in the digital product passport rather than either life cycle inventory data or life cycle assessment results. So I think they mainly will concern a lot of other things.
Okay, great, thank you. We will continue with the last question. As a government agency, how independent are you of the views of the Swedish government?
Well, we are then required to take part of the technical advisory board and the EF steering group, but usually I don't have any instruction from the government offices when I participate in those meetings. However, of course, when we are negotiating, we are doing that on behalf of Sweden, and then we need to make sure that we have the entire government involved in the answers that we make. So then we act on behalf of Sweden.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Björn, very much, and thank you for all the questions submitted through the Q&A. So thank you, Björn Spak, advisor to Swedish Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you.
If you are interested in exploring more about how life cycle thinking and LCA is integrated into national and EU policy, I recommend checking out these selected projects and publications for further information. And all these links can be found in the event post on lifecyclecenter.se. And feel free to reach out to Björn with any questions, and his email address is displayed here. And the Life Cycle Talks are published by the Innovation Cluster for the Life Cycle Perspective and Swedish Life Cycle Center. And the next talk will be held on January the 24th with Hanna Holmqvist from Chemsec discussing chemical footprints. And to ensure you don't miss next Life Cycle Talk, follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter. And thanks for listening.